Hello? Hello? How's everyone doing? Can you hear me? All right, perfect. So let's get started. Today we're going to talk about training for a successful software project. Um, so I'm engineer Abdulmuhsin Alkandari. I'll be your presenter for the day, and I'll be representing Unitary Team. So to get started, a little bit about who I am. Uh, so as I said before, my name is Abdulmuhsin Alkandari. My work experience, currently I work at Unitary Team as their Chief Technology Officer. I used to lead the software engineering team at TalentScript. I was responsible for building their software platform, whether it was on the back end or front end, uh, the whole basically 9 yards. Before that, I worked at Expedia.com as a software engineer intern. I was an intern at Expedia.com, and I was responsible for the optimization of their BTO service, or the bed type occupancy service. In addition to all that, I've been freelancing for the past 6+ years, and I have a master's in software engineering and a bachelor's in software engineering and mathematics. Uh, I think my experience, both my work experience and my educational experience, have given me enough of an insight into the technological field that I'm able to give you these kind of insights. So, without further ado, let's get started. So, before I get started, uh, as you saw at the beginning, to obtain an attendance certificate today, or basically over the course, any viewer that wants to do that will have to fill out the link that we posted at the beginning of the chat. It's available right there, and you can go ahead and fill that up, and that way we can get you an attendance certificate when the time comes for them to be sent out. So let's go ahead with the overview. So in this day and age, really any business that we have really depends on a workforce and some kind of software that we have, regardless of what business that we have out there. A lot of companies used to say that, oh, it's impossible for uh, work to happen outside of the company. Work's supposed to happen inside the company. We need people to sit at their office and do their work. But currently, as we all have seen through the coronavirus issue that we have, that really all business has been kind of switched to to being handled and managed electronically. All of us are working remotely, and work is kind of still going on, right? So this really comes as no surprise to us in the tech field, as we believe that every company that you can think of depends on software in one way or another. Even if you really, even if there is a company that you can say, oh, well, it really doesn't because they are a real small store or whatever, and they don't really depend on any software, I would tell you to think again, because just think about it. Even if for their accounting services or for basically adding up money, their cashier register, that's still software that they depend on, right? In addition, we believe that any company out there would also benefit from having a virtual presence. This virtual presence can give them an air of professionalism, can give them benefits of directly reaching their clients, can even help them reach their clients when no other way to reach their clients is available, as we know, as we are seeing today during lockdowns. So businesses that are able to have a web presence during the lockdown are still able to conduct business. Whereas businesses who were unable to keep with the times and have been unable to uh, have a proper web presence have been left out of the market and are unable to conduct business during lockdown hours. Okay, so over the course of this workshop, we're going to try to provide you with insights into how software can benefit your ventures, and in addition to how to make these software projects and how to make these software ventures successful. Okay. So why is software important to business, right? So your software really falls into your business falls into one of four types. Your business is either based around software, and that could be a multi-vendor web app, a delivery service, an online video game, or a social media application. What I mean by a multi-vendor web app is basically you can be a vendor that doesn't really have a physical storefront, right? So an example of that, and I guess the prime example of that would be Amazon.com. Amazon started out as a fully online web store, right? No one can say, "Oh, I'm going to the Amazon store, the physical Amazon store, and buying my product," right? So if you are a multi-vendor web app like Amazon, what your business is nothing more than software, right? And your business is only as strong as the software that supports it. This also is true for delivery services such as Deliveroo, Carriage, Uber, online games such as Dota, Destiny. These ones are really easy to figure out. It's really clear why the software is important to these businesses. The second type of software of a business that you can be is a business that needs custom software to manage internal needs, right? So you're running a company, it's starting to grow bigger and bigger. You have different departments. It's starting to get very difficult to keep track of what's going down in different departments. So you're going to need either an HR management tool, an accounting tool, or a POS system. Again, this is very elementary to figure out why this is important to that company. Basically, if they don't have these software solutions, they're going to be running into blockers of keeping track of attendance, keeping track of payments, all that kind of jazz, right? Number three, and this is really important to smaller businesses, is you're a business that's looking to expand through software. And I'm not talking about expanding through software through the existing platform. I'm talking about expanding through software independently, right, with your own platform. Either through an online market for your products, having a live chat or a live chat service for your customer service, or a 24-hour chat that can handle answering questions from your customers 24 hours a day, 7 hours a week, without you having to kind of include yourself into the process. That's not the only limitations of these of ways to expand your business through software. You could possibly have an application where you can have your users interact directly with you. If you're running a gym, maybe you have or a doctor's office, you could have an application that allows your users to book appointments with you, etc. Okay, and then there's the fourth type of business, or basically the businesses that say, "Oh, I don't need software because of some reason." Now let's talk about why this kind of viewpoint is wrong. Okay, in our belief, every business needs software in one way or another. So why is this the case? Today, over 2 trillion searches are made through Google per year. Okay? That's 5.6 billion searches per day, 228 million per hour, or 63,000 searches per second. This number is only growing. It's not getting less. It's growing year by year. More and more people are using the internet. More and more users are searching on the internet, and users are spending more and more time on the internet. Customers are always online. 90% of customers have stated that they are online, and 96% of these customers, even if they don't shop online, look for information about the products that they buy online. They look for reviews, they look for pictures, they look for prices. So they make their decision, or they try to make their decision, a long time before they get to your store, a long time before they get up to the cashier and are ready to pay. They've researched your product, they've looked at your reviews, they've looked at images about your product, and they've made their decision before coming into a store. So if your product is not online, if you are not online as a business, you're basically losing out on being part of the decision-making process. If your clients are unable to see your product, they're going to see the competitor product, build trust with this competitor product. They're going to like it. They're going to like what they see, like what they read about in reviews, and they're going to go to the store. Even if you have a product competing and maybe even better than the competing product, what they're going to do is purchase the product that they've built trust with. Okay? The last point that we want to make, or not the last point in this slide, is that with the birth of online services such as Netflix, Instagram, and Amazon, customers have come to expect to be able to browse your products and services 24/7. Customers no longer want to wait till the stores are open. Sometimes they're laying in bed 2 in the morning and they're like, oh, I want to make this purchase. Let me see what products are out there. What they're going to do is they're going to load up their browser, they're going to load up their phone, and they're going to start looking. So you need to be out there. Another thing to be aware of is that an online presence gives your company the ability to serve clients on a global scale. No global company today does business through mail, right? You don't communicate with your global customers through mail. Yes, you might use the mail services to send them the product, to deliver the product to their door, but then to be on a global scale, to serve global clients, you need to be online, right? You need to have a website, you need to have an application, you need to basically be there, because they're not here, they won't see you, and if they won't see you, they can't conduct business with you, right? And especially if we're talking about being in the MENA region, like we are, in the MENA region, you are limited to a very small segment of the worldwide of worldwide customers, right? And sometimes niche products require you to get to a global client base. The way to do that is to be online. Okay. Also, utilizing software and technology allows us to keep permanent digital records that are backed up off-site in such a way that we can ensure accurate and trusted information for all our records. Right? There's no longer an issue of, oh, did one of my employees tamper with my records? Because I can basically check who made the change, when the change is made, and where it was made. So I can trust the information that I have, and I can trust that it's accurate. The final point is the average user uses internet services through PCs or smartphones once every 12 minutes. That basically means that any given person will use their phone once every 12 minutes. Why are they using their phone? Either to check their social media, either to check on a website, either to use an application. If you're not there, you're not being seen. Cool? Okay, let's move on. Uh, it's important to know that the first impression a user gets, or a first impression that professional customers get, such as other companies that you might want to deal with, such as suppliers or producers, is through your website. Professional customers will not be looking for you on your Twitter profile. They won't be looking for you on your Instagram profile. They won't be looking for you on the App Store. The first time you reach out to them as a company, the first thing they'll probably do is they'll write your name into whatever search engine that they use, and they'll try to get a first impression. If you don't have a website, if you don't have a proper business profile that they can visit, they're going to get their first impression of you somewhere else. Or worst case scenario, they'll even start to think of you as an improfessional or an unprofessional company. And that's not going to be a good look for you because they won't be willing to conduct business. The best way to control your company's reputation, or generally any person's reputation online, is to be the publisher and the controller of that information through your website or through your platform. Okay? And it's also very clear, as we mentioned before, that using tech smartly gives your company an advantage over their competitors. If you can showcase your product better, you can provide a better user experience on the web. Even if your product is not necessarily better than your competitor's product, you're still going to have an advantage because you're going to be seen first, you're going to look better online, and you'll basically give your users a better experience. Okay? Also, utilizing tech smartly allows you to reduce cost over time by reducing the need for a large workforce and eliminating jobs for menial tasks. Instead of having a 12-person accounting department for managing your 100-person company, you'll just need 2 people in an accounting department with good accounting software. The same for your HR departments. Better software tools means a smaller workforce, means less of a cost in the future. Okay, so let's get around to understanding the market. Now we understand why software is important. Now let's understand the market for software, how to approach creating software for the market, and what kind of ideas are there out there. What's the process to understand the market? Number one is to define the problem. Figure out what the problem you want to solve is. Know what you want to provide your customers, because that's 80% of the answer. If you start building software and you don't know what problem you're trying to solve, you will come out with a product that no one wants to use because it's not solving a problem, or it's solving the wrong problem. Okay? For example, if I'm building a product for an HR company or a company that provides HR services for bigger companies, I might build a product that say allows them to get more applicants, right? But if you go into the HR market, you'll figure out that the problem is not getting more candidates. It's getting quality candidates. So while you provided a software solution to allow these people to get more candidates, that doesn't solve a problem that they have, because they already have many candidates as it is, and the problem that they're facing is how to sift through all these candidates and coming up with prime candidates. So you spent time and money coming up with the solution, but no one's going to use your product because they don't want to pay money, or they don't want to waste their time using software that doesn't solve a problem that they have. Number two in the process is understanding your users, right? So the success of any product can only be defined and can only be attained if it can serve its users properly. And this goes back to defining the problem. If you can't pull in your users, your product is not going to be used, which means your product is going to be abandoned, which means your market share is going to go down, which means you're going to have a failed software product. Okay. Number three in the process is defining your requirements. When you go ahead and want to define, or when you go ahead and want to design software or build software, you need to be very aware of what your requirements are. If you are unaware of the requirements, or if you have unclear requirements, what you're going to get is one of two things. You're either going to spend too much time building too much, or you're going to build, build a product that hits on some points, but misses on others, which can make it a failure in the software market. So while we're talking about this process, we're going to take each one of these in detail, and we're going to explain how to do each of these. Number four, we have the determining software flow and the user experience, or UX. What we're talking about here is we're trying to determine how our software progresses from one functionality to the other. How our login. One second, guys. Apparently, my mic isn't performing, so let's figure this out. Okay. Is this better now? Or do I need to do more to fix it? Can you guys hear me? Do I need to... Okay, give me 1 second. Let me... What about now? Okay. Uh, Hopefully this is better. I'll keep on going. You guys can update me in the live chat if it's not better. Um, so where were we? We were talking about software flow. So what we mean by software flow is how your product or how your software flows from one how your software flows from one function to the next. How you do login, how you do register. Do you do login and register first, or do you allow your users to have anonymous login while using other functions? So some products let you use the product while you work. Some applications let you use the product, and then when you need to register, you register. Whereas other products, you have to register before getting into the product itself. This is called user experience, and it really differs from one product to another. And you as a company, you as a business entrepreneur, need to figure out what kind of experience you want your customers to have. Do you want your customers to be able to directly get in and use your product and only register when they have to? Or maybe your users don't even need to register. Maybe they can even do everything as a guest and even make orders as a guest. This is a decision you have to make as a software provider, right? And really the decision depends on the users that you have. So that's where its importance comes from. Number 5 is designing and developing the software solution. So, and this is really to us the biggest part. The software needs to be built in one way or another, right? It can be through an internal team, a third-party development company, freelancers, but it still needs to be built. And the right choice of these developers or these engineers that are going to provide your software will make or break your product. And it's very important to make this right choice through proper research of these developers and through understanding what each developer can bring to your company. It's also very important to realize that while a given developer can be very good at producing one type of product, they might not be as good at providing another type of product. For example, you might be working with a developer currently that has built your website and has been really good at managing your website and your content on your website. But now your company wants to come up with a mobile application. The skills that a developer needs to build a website are not the same as the skills that they need to build a mobile application. If the developer in question does not have experience with building mobile software, they're going to run into issues that might cause your product to be lesser because they're unfamiliar with the kind of UX or user experience expected on mobile devices, or they're unskilled in the languages that are required for mobile development. Number 6 is deliver, maintain, and update. And this is one that we tend to be blind to because we're so engrossed in getting our product out into the market that we're not really thinking about how we're going to maintain our product. We're going to talk about why once your product is developed and released, that's just the start, right? You're only 20% there. Your product's out there. Now you need to maintain it. We'll talk about that, what that means. We'll talk about what there is to do when you maintain, and how important it is to have a plan out, have it all planned out. So let's get started with the next slide. Before we get into all of this, a very important question that comes out, or this is part of defining your problem, is what's my budget? What should my budget be? Right? I want to figure out my problem, but I need to figure out my budget so I know what kind of problem I can take up, or what kind of problem I can face. So, in general, as a general statement, right, from our experience in as a company providing tech consultations and software products, we believe that your budget should match the scope of your software, right? In general, what this means is for most projects or for most businesses, they can expect to have 10 to 20% of their total budget dedicated to software and tech, right? And here I'm talking about types 2, 3, and 4. This is for businesses that don't depend 100% on the software, not businesses that are like multi-vendor web apps or online video games or that ilk. No, we're talking about businesses that depend on software to either further their business or internal software. 10 to 20% of your total budget will usually cover most of your software and tech needs, if not all of them. And always remember that cost correlates or tends to correlate with the quality and the transparency, and that transparency with your developers is important, right? So if you're able to give an accurate estimate of your budget to your developers before they start work and before they start to give you a solution, they're going to be able to provide you with a better product, because they'll be able to figure out solutions that are either cost saving or that provide you with higher quality. So let's go ahead and talk about defining the problem, right? So to properly define a problem that we're facing in software, when we're going about software development, is based off of the following questions. So what is the business? It's very important to understand what the business is. And what I'm talking about when I'm saying what the business is not just, sometimes this is really easy, right? So if I'm selling products online, the business is selling products online. Easy, right? But beyond that, what is the scope of the business? So who are my target? Who are my target market? What am I trying to do scope-wise with this software? Is it going to be providing tracking for the deliveries, for instance? Is it going to be providing? Is my refund process going to be in the scope of the product, or is that going to be handled outside through clients coming into the store? Maybe my software venture is not even to provide an online store. Maybe I just want to provide an online catalog. This is all possible, right? And it's all up. It's important to know this before you start your product. But that's going to help you down the road when you try to get into the nitty-gritty details of designing and developing the software. Again, we answered how will this software serve the business. We kind of answered that. Another important question is the product aimed internally or is it aimed externally? Now, what do we mean by that? So if we're aiming a product internally, that means that the users that are using this are going to be company employees, right? Which means that they're going to be paid to utilize this product to successfully complete their jobs. If it's external, that means that I'm going to have outside customers that are going to be using my product. Why is this an important question? Well, the fact is, is that when internal employees are using your product, you can get away with your product not having a very high quality UI or a very clear UX. Everyone that's going to be using this product is going to be required to use it in addition to them being trained to use it. Since they're trained and since it's a requirement, you don't have to invest that much into a complex UI or an interesting user experience. It's part of their job. They're going to use it. They're going to get done with the work, and that's it. When you're thinking about serving a product externally, you're going to have to be very aware of what kind of complex UIs you want to use and how simple the user experience is going to be, in addition to whether the user experience is what the users want it or not. Okay? And then the final question is, which systems should you target? A lot of clients, from our experience, a lot of clients come in and the first words out of their mouth is, I want to build an app. That's not always the system that you want to target, right? And this goes back to internal or external use cases, or basically who your target market is. If I'm targeting professional users or professional customers who are going to be using my product at work, more often than not, these users won't be able to use their phones or use apps. They're probably going to be required to use the systems given to them by their employer, which means that they're going to have computers or laptops that they're going to have to access your software through. So it's important to understand that the systems you target really correlate directly toward what kind of solution you're going to come up with. All right, so at the end of this phase, or at the end of this definition of the problem, you should have a problem statement with the benefit that the solution will provide, and basically knowing who your users will be in general and whether they're internal or external. Number 2, understanding your users. It's very important to know that your users are different. They're not equal. They're going to be different from different age groups, from different cultural backgrounds, maybe even different language speakers. You're going to have people who speak Arabic sometimes, people who speak English. You're going to have users who speak other languages. And then you're going to also have and you have to remember that all these experiences that the users have outside of your application will affect how they deal with your application. As you can see on the image on the right, how we think really, there's a little bit more than 50% of how we think is not rational thinking. There's a lot of subconscious emotional feeling that goes on when we use products. A lot of times we don't like a product because it doesn't fit our attitude. It does something that doesn't go with our instincts, or maybe it doesn't match our beliefs. For example, maybe if I use a new product and I'm used to swipe to ignore and it doesn't have swipe to ignore, then I get these emotional feelings about feeling uncomfortable with the product. This can really be seen if you look at the difference between iOS and Android users. And I know this is a big debate between a lot of people, but the reality is, at this day and age, there's very little, I'm not going to say technical difference, but I guess feelable difference between the two platforms if we're talking about terms of performance and speed and all that kind of thing. But what you have is two different user experience models. And a lot of times you'll see if an Android user switches to an iOS phone, they'll feel uncomfortable using the phone and vice versa. So this goes to understanding your users and your user wants. So do we go about this? There are multiple techniques, but a very good technique that we have come across or that we've noticed and that has been very well documented in tech literature is user interviews and using user personas. We'll talk more about them in upcoming slides, but these are basically ways to get an organic feel for your users and try to use what you understand about your users to better serve your product. So at the end of your understanding your users phase, you should have your user personas, you should understand your user barriers, and you should understand their motivators, because all of these will come into play when they're using your product. So how do you go about questioning your users for the user interviews? It's important to remember that it really expands past their technical needs. As I said, if you go back to the iOS Android example, technically both platforms perform pretty much the same kind of use cases, but still there's preference between the two. So before you start asking technical questions and before you start asking about what the user wants from the product that you want to provide, ask questions about who the user is, right? Because you want to use these interviews to build the user personas, and you can only build user personas properly if you understand how each group of users is or are, and you can only do that if you understand who each user is. And you want to know what they do for a living, what their age group is, what their hobbies are, and you'll start to notice that these certain group indicators will start to translate to related pain points or related motivators. So some good examples of questions to ask for user interviews are the 5 that I have down here, right over here. I mean, these are not necessarily written in stone, and it's important to know that to keep your user interviews organic and more conversation-like. But it's always good to have a few questions that you want to be able to answer at the end. These are an example, and you guys can work from these in the future if you would like. So number 1 is, what's the biggest related to whatever task that you're asking them about? Number 2 is, what's the hardest part about the task? Number 3 is, how do you make the task easier? Right? Number 4 is, have you paid for any competitor product? And if they have, you can ask a follow-up question of what made you pay for the competitor product. Now, what you can see from these questions is you're trying to find the internal thinking of the user as they do their task. For instance, if we go back to HR, what's the difficulty that you get when you get a new, or when you as an HR person have when you approach hiring a new candidate? You're going to start seeing that different users have different difficulties, have different things that they do to make their task easier. The things that they currently do easier, the things that they currently do to make the task easier might also give you ideas for future features that you can add into the app or into your software platform. These user interviews might also help you reevaluate where your project is going and what your end problem is that you had formulated in step 1. When doing your user interviews, it's very important to keep in mind to keep your questions open-ended and to keep the interviews short, just so your interviewees don't get bored. But also remember to not butt in while the other person is talking. So if your user is being very passionate about the question that's at hand, let them talk. The more they talk, the more you will know, and the more that'll help you. And the more that'll help you towards developing your product in the future. Now, let's say you've got all of these done. You've figured out your user interviews. You have maybe interviewed 20, 30 people. It's going to be very difficult trying to serve 30 people at once. So what you're going to do is you want to break down this information into a few user personas. Maybe 2, 3, possibly 4. And what a user persona is, it's basically a sample of a user group. This is going to be a fictional sample, but we're going to give this sample life, right? So what I mean by give it life is we're going to give it a personality, and that's where persona comes from, is we're trying to give this sample a personality. So we start by giving this persona a name, where they live, for instance, their age, what they do, where they live. We're going to start to note down what their favorite competitor products are, or what their wants and needs are, what their frustrations are. And we're going to make up this imaginary bio for them with imaginary skill sets. It's important to keep these clear. They should showcase the user needs more than anything else, and the products that they like and dislike. What you're going to notice is when you look at a product, a requirement in the future, you're going to be able to say, okay, let's for instance take David Miller. What's David Miller going to feel like when they use this feature? Okay, what's going to make this feature better for David Miller, and what's going to make it worse? Now, it's impossible to say all your features are going to fit all your personas, but it's important to keep user dissatisfaction to a minimum while maximizing user satisfaction. So you're going to try to find a happy medium between what users really like and what frustrates users, while also keeping in mind that there will always be users who will be frustrated with your product no matter what you do. But it's still important to know that if they're paying users, you will need to cater to them in one way or another. Next on the block is defining your requirements. Okay, so when defining your requirements, it's really important to keep them clear, quantifiable, and easy to determine if they are met or not. Okay, so don't have a requirement that's very iffy. Like I've seen requirements that people write, the system should be pretty. Okay, that's fine. We want our system to look nice, but how is that quantifiable? How can the developer know that the requirement is complete, right? What's pretty? Pretty differs from a person to another person. If you want to have some kind of requirement that talks about your what your look and feel is, you might have a requirement that says 7 out of 10 users enjoy the look of the product. That way, this requirement is quantifiable and it's easy to determine if it's met. What you would do at that point is when you have the product, you make a survey. And you need 70% of these people to say yes, they like the design. If they do, then you pass that requirement. What we were really talking about is the same thing, right? Both requirements were talking about the system looking pretty, but one of them was clear and quantifiable, while the other was not. The first one was not something that any developer could meet, while the second one they could clearly meet through this requirement. And non-functional requirements. What we mean by functional requirements is requirements that are features in your product. Requirements that directly relate to the usage of your product. So a functional requirement for Instagram, for instance, would be the user can post a story. That's functional, right? If that's functionality that the user does and that the system allows them to do. A non-functional requirement can be the one that I talked about before, which is how the look and feel can be. Or it can also be something about the speed of the product. For instance, response time to be low, I might have I might have a non-functional requirement that says the system should respond to the user within 1 second on a 2 megabyte per second connection. It's a very clear, very quantifiable, very easy to determine if it's met requirement, right? It's also a good practice to categorize the requirements in a way that allows us to figure out which ones we need to do first. A good way to do this is to do a needs, wants, and delighters, exciters categorization. Basically, your needs is everything that your product needs to do for it to be usable. Your wants is things that your users expect to have. While your delighters are your new features that users don't expect but will be delighted to use. Let's take an example of this. When if you're in Kuwait or outside of Kuwait, if you're in Kuwait, look at Carriage, for example. If you're outside of Kuwait, you can look at Deliveroo maybe or something out of the same vein. When that came out, it had it had a set of requirements that it had to fulfill. The needs was basically the system needed to allow users to make orders, and the system needed to allow users to pay for their orders. The users expected or wanted to be able to search for their orders, right? So that was in the wants category. But what they came up with as a delighter is the ability the system allows the user to track their order while it's being delivered in real time. This was new to the market at the time. It was a delighter. It got users on board, even though there were different platforms out there that provided similar services. If you're building software today that wants to fulfill that wants to fit in the same market, you're going to see that the delighter is changed, right? Tracking your order live is no longer a delighter, since now users kind of expect it. So it starts moving into the wants category, right? So categorization is a case-by-case basis and a project-by-project basis, but it also allows you to see which requirements you should fulfill first, all right? So at the end of this phase, you should have a ranked list of your requirements that will help you estimate your budget and will allow you to drop some of your delighters or some of the wants if the project is starting to go over budget. All right. So we've gone through halfway through we're halfway through the process, the details of the process so far. I want to give time for a few questions before we take a break for prayers and stuff. So if anyone has any questions or if anything is unclear, please go ahead and ask questions. I'll give about 10 to 15 minutes to questions, and then we'll take a 15-minute break. Is everything clear so far? Is everyone comfortable with what we've been going through? Uh, so I have a question here. How to tell if going with a website is a better option than an app? That's a very good question, actually. As I mentioned before, um, it's better to go with a website over an application if your clientele is a clientele that is most likely using their personal computers or their laptops. This usually means that your clients are company users, which means people who are working in a company during work hours. They are more likely to be able to use a website than they will be able to use an app, right? It's also another client segment that would probably prefer a website over a app is if you're talking about an application for professional customers. Professional customers will usually be conducting business using the app, using your software platform, and when conducting business, it's much easier to do so on a PC or a laptop website than it is on an app. So if you're running a dashboard, if you have something that has a lot of information that you want to display on a screen, it tends to be much better to have it on a website, as no matter how well designed your app is, it's very difficult to cram too much information on a phone screen. Even though our phone screens are getting a bit bigger and bigger, this kind of may change in the upcoming with devices such as the Surface Pro Duo or the foldable screen devices. But currently, that's the case. If you have professional customers or customers that are working in a company, then you're more likely to be better off with a website than you are with an app. Hopefully that answers your question. If not, feel free to ask a follow-up question so I can answer it better. Um, yeah, the question is, can anyone start an app business without a website, as it is an official website for the business, even though the business is based on app services, for example, Talabat, etc.? Yeah, we see more and more of this happening. Uh, this can be done, and in certain cases is totally fine to go app first. Uh, but in general, this only really works if the people that you're working with usually don't have a platform already, right? So even Talabat, they did start with an app, have a website now. Carriage, I don't think they have a website any longer since they got basically acquired by Talabat. Oh, actually, they still do. But you can go with an app only direction. If you're for instance just building a game app, if you're just building a game, for instance, that's going to be on phones, it could be fine to just go ahead without a website. Although to look professional, I would say that a website is still kind of a requirement. Uh, Oh, apparently Talabat started with a website. I guess I didn't know that. Thank you for the addition of information. So I was mistaken. Talabat started with a website. But I don't think that's a requirement to start up business, but it is definitely better to have a website to be more professional. I don't think it's a 100% requirement, though, to have a website. Just a small addition to the previous question. Um, a lot of times, if you want to get away with not having a website, uh, it would really have to be an app where you really don't provide the services of your app on the website. In the earlier days of apps, we saw we saw a lot of apps that came out without websites, but this is no longer true. Most apps today at least have a landing page. So I would say it's much better to have a website, as I said before, but I don't think it's really 100% required. The next question coming in: does a website have a high cost for business? Not necessarily. Hosting is very cheap these days. You can even get away with free hosting if you do it through Firebase hosting, for instance. And you don't necessarily have to have a very complex website. If you have an app running, you could just have maybe a landing page that kind of takes you to your application. And in that case, your landing page could even be built very easily by you, or you can just use a pre-existing template and can create that web page for less than 50 US dollars, and then basically host it online for 20 to 30 USD a year. So it shouldn't be a high cost for a business. Uh, in most cases, your app would actually cost you more than your website if you're doing that. If you're doing something like that, 100% your app is going to cost you more than your website, and your website is just going to be some yearly cost for the domain name if you use free hosting services just to have a landing page. You're most welcome. I'm happy to help. The next question is, how can we utilize artificial intelligence in a business? There's a lot of use cases for artificial intelligence. It really depends. Most use cases are business dependent, but a general use case would be gathering data on your customer interactions and then building a AI chatbot that can respond to your clients 24/7 without you having to interact with them, or having a customer service support team being available to interact with them. Um, Artificial intelligence can also help with building a recommendation service, such as what we see in Netflix. Some people don't really know how Netflix picks their recommendations, basically what Netflix tells you you should watch next. It does that based on artificial intelligence. It kind of figures out what other people who watch the same things as you watch, and then it recommends what they've been watching to you as something that you will probably like in the future. This recommendations kind of use case can also be expanded to e-commerce, since you can use artificial intelligence to track user spending and figure out which products you should put on sale, which products you should create offers of, and which products you should showcase to which users. Generally, those are the use cases that we see for most businesses, but there are even businesses that could be built around artificial intelligence. So that's a very broad question, but I think I've covered it as best as possible. If you have a more detailed question you want to ask, I could definitely expand on that. All right, awesome. You're welcome, and I'm happy to be able to help. We'll take a 15 to 20-minute break, and we will be back uh, at around 6:40 or 6:35. So stay tuned. So we're back from the break. I hope you guys uh, took a few minutes to uh, shake yourself out from the boredom from the last part. So let's get started. So in the first part of this lecture, I guess we'll call it, we basically covered the process up to defining our requirements. Just a quick reminder of what we covered. We covered um, why software is important for a business, what to do to define your problem, how to understand your users, how to go through your user interviews, how to come up with a user persona, and finally, we covered how to define your requirements and what constitutes as a valid requirement. So let's get started. So right here you see an example of an appropriate requirement. Uh, The system shall allocate a unique identifier to each order, named order ID. As we talked about before, this is a very clear, very concise requirement. It's very easy to tell if the system actually does that or not. You just look at the database. Uh, if each order has a proper ID with the order ID name, then we're good to go. This is how your requirements should look like. They should be clear, they should be concise, they should be achievable, and they should be trackable. Uh, a quick tip, if you're uncomfortable with requirements in general and you want to come up with them for your first time or maybe the first few times, always start your requirement with the system shall and then do. That's going to help you write appropriate requirements just so you get into the groove of it before getting into writing more complex requirements. Number four of the software development of how to basically build software properly or how to reach building software properly is determining the flow in the UX. It's important to remember that there's each user has a flow point where or a flow range where they feel comfortable using the application. If they're outside of this comfortable flow range that you see here, if they're outside of this comfortable flow range that you see here, they get into either anxiety or boredom. Boredom means the user is just bored with the application. They don't want to use it anymore. It's it's horrible for them and it doesn't provide them with the satisfaction that they want. Difficult if it's too difficult to use, if the experience is kind of bad, and it's just not cooperating with the player or the user, are going to start to go into anxiety, which will again make them leave your application. So when determining flow in UX, it's very important to find a challenge, find not just the challenge, um, but also find the comfort point between anxiety and boredom where the user is kind of has a flow where there is some getting used to the application where the application isn't really like drinking water, but it's also not to the point where it's driving them into anxiety where your application is too complex or your system is too complex and um, it's basically making your users anxious enough to leave it. Again, if we drive back to the iOS versus Android, you'll notice that most Android users tend to have a higher uh, flow ceiling, so their flow is probably more around here, while iOS users have a lower flow feeling where the flow is really around here. Android users like to have a more complex UX. They like to be able to control how their UX look. They like to have these customization options. iOS users not so much. So as we said, it's important to find a challenge. Let your users tell you the problems you need to solve. This goes back to the user interviews. Then you need to set clear goals. And when you start determining flow and UX, forget about the fancy UI, right? This is trying to figure out how you're going to flow from one function to the next. So just take out a pen and paper and start sketching. Sketching is a really good way to figure out how you're going to go through your screens. Don't tell me you're bad at drawing. That shouldn't hold you back. If you're really bad at drawing to the point where your screens are not clear for your teammates, there are tools out there that can help you sketch very quickly. One of them is wireframes.io, I think, or draw.io, sorry. And then when you have this flow in UX, don't just take it for granted, right? Get feedback. So we all have this notion that when we create something and we spend a lot of time with it, it's perfect. The only reason it's perfect is because we've spent so much time coming up with this flow, is we know it by heart, we're very comfortable with it, so it's perfect to us. So it's very important to show your flow, to show your sketches out to someone else, and to get feedback. So with this feedback, you'll be able to tell if you're going into the right direction or if you've kind of slipped into your own mind. Uh, and when you slip into your own mind, you kind of come up with a flow that only fits you and doesn't really fit your users. Uh, After you use this feedback, iterate again, do it again, fix what you were told you should fix, come up with maybe new ideas, and integrate them into your flow and user experience, and again get feedback, and so on and so forth until you're comfortable. You and your team are comfortable with the feedback that you're getting. Uh, at the end of this phase, you should find a flow that fits your wants and needs, and that should demonstrate to the developers how your app works. A lot of times we have clients that come in and they're like, "Oh, we had a developer before and they didn't do it exactly how we wanted." Yes, sure. I will show you a live example. Just let me. Uh, on the next slide, I'll first showcase uh, an example of a flow. Then we'll get to showcasing a live example of draw. What was I saying? So yeah, we get a lot of clients who say, "Oh, we had developers that didn't do it, build the application like we wanted it. They built it a different way." And then I'm like, "Okay, so how do you want it?" And then the customer doesn't know, or the client doesn't know how to describe their flow and or describe what they want. And the reasoning behind that is they have a flow inside their head, but they really haven't put it down on paper. So it's very important to put that down on paper to be able to share with the developers of your application or the developers of your software system in general. All right. So let me give you an example of what a flow looks like. This is an example flow. So as you can see, it's very concise. There's not too much detail to it. We can see here that this is clickable because it has an arrow to a map, and the different parts of the map are clickable. And if you click certain things, it takes you to certain places. Your flow is going to be a little bit more detailed than this, just so you parts of the map are clickable, and if you click certain things, it takes you to certain places. Your flow is going to be a little bit more detailed than this, just uh, so you can get more knowledge. It's going to have headings. It's going to have important details such as the button names. Maybe this is submit. Maybe this is navigate. But it's generally going to be like this. It's going to show you this screen goes into this screen. From this screen, we can either go to the profile of the place, for instance, or we can save it to favorites. Then if we click a different place, we can maybe navigate. If we reach our area, then we get a check box that tells us we're in the right place. So this is a flow. This shows the developer clearly what you want and how you want it. This also will feel more comfortable to, if you want to share your idea with someone who doesn't know it, they'll be more comfortable with your idea if they can see it and you're not just telling them. So I'll pull up draw.io to show you an example. Just give me 1 second. Um, Okay, sorry. So it's called Mockflow. Draw.io is for uh, drawing flow charts, not designing flow. So if you go on Mockflow, and I'm trying not to, I originally didn't want to show you this application because I don't want to be giving out ads for anything. So let's say I just log in, sign in with Google. Let's sign in with any one of my accounts. Sure. All right. Okay. So when you get onto Mockflow, you can create a new UI type, a UI project, and then you can choose whether it's for the web, whether it's for whether it's for iPhone, iOS, in general, Android, whether it's a watch application or whatever you want to start with. So let's say it's for the web, and I want to create a project for, I don't know, my company website, right? And I start. Okay. So now I'm gonna get a black canvas, and on that black canvas, I can just drag windows out here. On the left, you have the different transform tools, so I can change its I can change its position. I can change its width, height. I also change it like this. If I wanted to. Then I can start adding things. For instance, maybe when you log into the website, you want to see an image first. So this is my image, and then I can have maybe the title of my website. Drag it over here on it. I want it really big. Awesome website, right? And then I can grab elements, and maybe I want buttons to take me to different pages. So here's my button. This is the cool page, and that's where it's going to take me. And you see since I chose a button, it has select page, select link, and I can link it to different pages or to maybe another website outside of my application. And if I let me create another page. So if I take it into um, prototype mode, I would actually be able to click this, and it would take me to the next page. Right? There's a lot you can do with this tool, but it should just be simple. You can group things together so they move like one at once. So this is now grouped, and if I move this, it moves together. If I want to add different elements, as you can see, there's pretty much all the elements you can think of. Drop downs, tooltips, progress bars, anything you want. And this can really help you draw out your flow if you are uncomfortable sketching it out by hand. I don't want to get too in depth with these tools. There's a lot of tutorials on different tools online. You don't have to use the one that I use right now. As I said, uh, honestly, I like to use pen and paper first or anything else. But these tools exist, whether it's Mockflow or Figma or any other tool you want to use. As long as you get a flow going, it should be fine. So now that we've figured out our flow, uh, we would want to move on to the next uh, step, which is the design and develop your application. And this is where uh, a lot of projects succeed or fail, right? A lot of projects either are able to come to reach the view that they want, or they fail to reach the view that they had in mind, and they don't come up with a product successfully uh, that successfully fulfills their goals. So let's talk about how to choose your developers to reduce the risk of not reaching your goal. So as we mentioned before, there are three main different types of developers. There are freelancers that you can hire part time, you can outsource to a company, or you can hire an in-house team. I'm going to talk about all three of them, and then we'll talk about when when each one can excel and when it's the best time to use each of these. Um, so first of all come freelancers. These are people who are hired part time. Usually they're college students. You go through Fiverr or through Upwork maybe, and you find freelancers that can help you build your application really quick. These tend to be the lowest cost. They also usually have the lowest quality. And I'm saying usually because you will come across a few freelancers that are really good at their job, that can do what you want whenever you want it. But the biggest issue that we see with freelancers is not even the quality of the product, but that freelancers tend to have erratic schedules uh, that make long-term development very difficult. So if you have an application that is that needs decent amount of work, that is a more of a platform or has more work to it than just a simple landing page or a simple application with no backend, you're going to have a hard time communicating with freelancers and knowing when they're going to work. Speaking as a person who has had freelancing experience, when I was a freelancer, what it meant was I was either during uni while off hours. Maybe it was 1 in the morning after I did my homework. I was working on freelancing projects, or when I was working at a salaried position company, I would work after hours at home around 10, 11 p.m. when I got the chance to work. It was difficult for me to communicate with my clients at a good time because my clients usually wanted to communicate during business hours, while my business hours tended to be when they were asleep, and vice versa. So freelancers, I would say the best time to do it is if you want to do an MVP. You just want to have a prototype which you can showcase, maybe to get funding at first. That's a good. It can be a good start for you to use freelancers. Maybe if your budget is very low, freelancers can also be a good choice. Moving on though to the outsourcing to a company. Here you can see medium costs. It's really, I'm not going to say it's cheap, but it's not as costly as having an in house team, while you can usually keep a high enough quality. But you need to ensure that the company that you are dealing with is not overloaded. So a lot of times we come across uh, software development companies who will take up any number of projects that come their way. They'll never say no to a project. And the issue that you get with that is you're not going to be a priority, right? It's gonna basically that company is gonna say whichever client is paying most is gonna be the highest priority, and that's how they're gonna do it. This causes nightmare stories for a lot of clients. We see clients with projects that are delayed over a year just because the company hasn't even responded to the client at all. Like the client has been dogging the company, he's been approaching them every now and then, and uh, they still don't answer the client's calls or his email. So choosing a good tech company is the best way to get uh, a successful start to your project. I would say the best time to outsource to a company is if you're a startup or if you are a mid-sized company, you want to start your tech venture, you you're not big enough to hire a full in-house team. It's good to outsource to a company, get your first version running, maybe make a few, make some revenue and some profit, and then using that revenue and profit, you can start hiring an in-house team. And at that point, you can even depend on the company if they were good with, if they were good at what they were doing during their development phase. You can depend on them to help you doing your hiring if you're not a tech specialized person. So to start out, it's a good idea to outsource to a company, um, but it does come out with its risks if you do not research the company that you're going to work with. Finally, we come to hiring an in-house team. This is the highest cost, but also the highest quality product. Why is it going to be the highest quality product? It's because you're going to be able to basically stew the product slowly and have the product match your vision. Since this is an in-house team, they work for you and only you, and they can spend as much time as you need to perfect your vision. So hiring an in-house team is a good idea if you have multiple standing tech ventures, or if you're starting to become a more seasoned product provider. Uh, Once you are ingrained in the market, you have market share, you're making a profit, you can start thinking about hiring an in-house team to really get your tech products going. A lot of and this is a big contention point with some clients because they ask, well, how do I know that I'm hiring a good team? And the thing is, you don't have to do it yourself. There are a lot of HR recruiting companies that can help you. Even if you don't want to go to an HR company because you say, well, they might not be experienced in tech, you can approach a tech consulting firm like ourselves or like others like us, and you can say, I want to use your consulting services to help me out with figuring out who's the best candidate. These consultants can sit in during interviews, or they can provide the interviews for you and perform them for you, and then provide you with the best candidates. That way, you'll be assuring that when you hire a team, they'll be of a high caliber and that they will provide you with quality content. All right. You've picked the team, you have the idea, you have the flow, you know your users, you're ready to go, right? Not really. When you develop software, you want your whole software application, your whole software platform to feel like one thing. You want it to be homogeneous. You don't want it to feel like it's been written by 10 people. You want your product to feel like it's written by one person, like it has one architecture, and that everything looks standard. You don't want one file to look like it was written by some savant who's like some magical genius, and another file to be written like it was written by a fifth grader, right? So it's important to have a coding standard. Code is written, it doesn't just go through one person. There's one person who writes it, and there's one person who reviews it. Think about it as how you would write a newspaper. Yes, newspapers have brilliant writers, but they still have editors that go over what was written to make sure that the quality of what's produced is at the highest caliber quality. Also, you have to ensure that you have a proper VCS or virtual control system. What this is going to do is it's going to provide you with backups of your code and will ensure out that you can version out your code in such a way that you can provide test versions and production versions. So when you are making an update to your application or to your software, you're not working directly with client data. It's also very important to establish proper communication channels. If you're working with a outside company, for instance, you should be familiar with what their official communication channel is. Uh, them just telling you to contact us whenever and wherever isn't really a good idea. They should establish communication channels such as a dedicated email or a dedicated WhatsApp, dedicated phone, whichever fits both you and the developers best. Maybe even it's a Slack channel or a Skype. Anything as long as communication is proper and people have a shared understanding of what's going on. Once that's done, you start development. You have to remember that development is going to hit snags. Nothing is going to go smoothly. Nothing in the world ever goes smoothly. But it's important to keep communication open, to follow the best practices throughout, and to keep proper documentation of everything that's happening. So in the future, if anything goes wrong, we can go back to the documentation and figure out what the issue is. Now, there are two ways to do this software development or to develop products. There's agile and waterfall. So, agile is basically the software development method where you get chunks of the product developed every short period of time. These chunks are then reviewed by the shareholders or the clients. They can see what's working, what's not, and they can give feedback to the developers so they can redo the develop or they can add it to the development loop. The benefit of agile is it's a more involved process. There's much more communication. You're able to start working with the application faster, but generally the development process is a very long process that only ends when feedback ends. And agile really is good for smaller projects and projects that don't really have a defined scope at the beginning and that are still growing. Uh, the second type of development is waterfall. And waterfall development is where each step of the development process only starts when the step before it ends. So we only ever start design when we're done with the requirements. We only ever start development when we're done with design. We only ever start deploying when we're done with development. And we only start maintaining when we're done with deployment. Waterfall is really good for very clearly defined systems and for systems that demand um, very high standards. So this is usually used in military products, in products that have severe certification criteria like medical device products or medical device iOSs. Uh, it's good to know which type of software development is being done by our developers. Um, it's it's better to choose the one that fits your style best. Maybe you just want to get a product at the end of the development term and not really uh, get into the nitty gritty of the development. Or maybe you want to have that continued communication loop with the agile where you can provide constant feedback. They're both used in they're both used in the real world, although agile is more prevalent nowadays, just due to the fact that waterfall doesn't allow for a feedback loop. Real development tends to be a combination of both, or there are other more complex types that we're not showcasing here, but we just wanted to give you a general idea. The product is developed. You're ready to deploy. You deployed. You delivered. Now it's the time where customers are using your product. It's important to know that all software comes with bugs, or unexpected behavior. And the maintenance phase, which is basically the first couple of months after the application is released, is mainly to deal with these issues and to fix them, right? Uh, that You're never going to have a software product that's fully bug free. We even see things like Windows or iOS or Mac OS, which are supremely successful examples of software that still have bugs and issues, and you have your phone hanging sometimes and it restarts, and it's affected by age. So it's important to know that successful software doesn't stay in its place. It's always important to keep current, to keep alive, to keep updating, to stay ahead of the competitors. Once you come out with a feature, that means your competitors are going to start copying you to get that same feature, right? You also need to be aware that your users' needs are going to be evolving as your users are going to start expecting similar features in your application. So it's very important to keep your software updated, to keep your software current. And the way to do that is to have a future vision, right? To know that there is a way forward. So you need to have a timeline. And I like to think that uh, any successful company, really, or any successful business has at the very least a 3 year goal or a 3 year vision of what's going to happen. So you know that, say, in 2020, you're going to release your MVP or your beta version, right? And this is the product that your beta testers get to use, or your early adopters. This is where you start giving them some free features just so they can use the application and be your prime users. Then maybe in 2021, you're going to do your initial release where this is the product is going out to everyone. But you also need to know where you're going to go the way forward, right? What happens after I release? When is my next version going to come out? What are my new delighters going to be in my application? And this goes back to your original requirements, is you don't need to fulfill all your delighters in version 1. Because if you fulfill everything in version 1, you won't have anything for version 2. So sometimes it's a good idea to create this starvation of features, or artificial starvation of features, where you release new features that maybe you had planned since day one every 3 months. The idea is to keep your customers interested, to keep them engaged. They know that you're catering to their needs and adapting and evolving. And if you do this, this will help you be successful as a, not just as a software product. I think this really applies to any business in general, that that business needs to keep current or else it's going to die out, right? And we saw this with Blockbuster, for instance. When Netflix came out, Blockbuster laughed at the Netflix model, but we all see today that Netflix is thriving while Blockbuster is bankrupt. Okay, so uh, that's the general idea of having a future vision is very important. Thinking uh, thinking past the delivery date. And I think a very important saying that I like is that we all plan for failure, but very few of us plan for success. So, what happens when I succeed, right? Do I stay put or do I keep going? And that's a very important point to keep in mind. That's all the material that I had for today. Uh, we were thankfully, unfortunately, or thankfully, however you see it, able to finish a bit faster than we're used to. Uh, we're used to giving this lecture to a live audience, and I think the interaction kind of takes up some time, and it's a little bit difficult to have that here. Um, so thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed it, and I apologize if you had any issues with the content. If you have any questions, advice, maybe considerations or critiques, please feel free to leave them in the live chat or contact us through email or through our website, and we'll be very happy to answer your questions. I'm gonna give another 10 to 15 minutes for questions. Uh, if people need more time than that, I'll also be more than open to continue asking questions for the time being. Thank you very much for your time, and that's all for me for now. So the question is, if I have all the features in my mind for the app, and let's say it covers all the client's needs, is it better to start with it or keep the unclear ones in study for for later updating for the clients as we respond to their feedback or whatever? So this is really a business decision. Uh, I tend to like to keep things in store for when I build a software product for myself. I like to keep things in store for my clients, so I think it's a good idea to always have something under your sleeve. Um, but there are have been successful products that have been all out at once, and I think that was the carriage model, right? The carriage model was provide the only new novel idea they had for the full time that they were out was the tracking. There was nothing else novel about it, and it worked for them. So I don't think that you'll fail if you don't keep things under your sleeve, as long as your application is still acquiring new features, even if it's at a slow state. Like Carriage was updating their application, but it was nothing major. Um, but yeah, I think it's a very good idea to keep something under your sleeve, to keep something in store for your clients that can basically excite them as they use your application. Uh, Going back to the carriage example, I really think that carriage succeeded the way it did in Kuwait because it didn't really have any real uh, competition. I think if there was a competent competitor for carriage that was providing exciting features and had something hidden up their sleeves all the time, that they would have done better. So, in short, I think it's better, yes, to keep something in store for your clients as a surprise. Don't give it all out at once. Uh, Keep it a little mysterious. You're most welcome. Happy to answer and the next question is: do I need a partner or employee who's an expert in tech terms in my team before I outsource my project? I wouldn't say you need them to be an expert, but they need you need someone who's knowledgeable enough about tech, uh, that you don't get that basically you don't deal with a developer who's talking about something that you don't understand, and they might not be saying the right things, or they might not be doing the right things without you understand. So it's very important to be familiar with technology. It is definitely better to have someone on your team who's an expert, but as long as they're intermediate, I would say in tech, uh, that is definitely a benefit. It's very bad to be blind tech wise. Like you have, but the better they are at tech, the better it is. So in short, yes. Long answer is they don't need to be an expert, but they need to be at least familiar with what's going on behind the scenes. What does MVP mean? So MVP as a uh, acronym means minimum viable product. What it means in the tech world is basically the minimum product required to demonstrate the purposes of the system. It means that it's near complete functionally, as long as the functionality is not fully there, but it demonstrates what your product will be doing. Yeah, Tech Coding X, you have a question. Go ahead. So the question is, all are mentioning that MVP is the best way to go for startups. In my case, I have 8 competitors. How can I acquire customers if they have started from 2 years ago, and I'm only on MVP phase? Very good question, and I think the answer can be very concisely put into going back. And I hate using this as one of my prime examples, but it really has a lot that can go into it. It's the carriage talabat thing that happened in Kuwait. If you look at talabat, right? Talabat had a very high market share. There was a few other uh, delivery services, but not none really had taken hold other than talabat. But when Carriage came out, it really came out with an MVP, right? It had really bad UX, it had really bad UI, but it came out with a single delighter that Talabat didn't have. It was one feature that was very key to bringing in customers, which was the tracking feature. So well, yes, they targeted restaurants that weren't targeted, but they also went with a feature that users were not accustomed to, but that users really kind of grasped onto, which was tracking their deliveries. So when you do your MVP, it doesn't mean don't come up with something new. In your MVP, demonstrate what's your app is best, what's best with your app. So spend the time making your app different, but also make sure it covers the needs of your customers, right? So if you get that magic feature like Carriage did, with the magic feature which will hook your customers, it's not going to matter if your competitors were there for 2 years or 20 years, you're going to get a foothold into the market. We can see that even happening in the app. If you look back into Apple when they first came out with the Mac 2 or the Apple 2, I don't remember its name. Uh, uh, Microsoft had a pretty much a dead hold on the market. Apple was able to target a specific customer segment through the app using the Apple 2 by providing that customer segment with certain features that they couldn't find on a Windows machine. So my advice is when you're facing multiple competitors and big competitors is to try to not face them directly. Come up with a solution that is different enough from them that you target a market that they haven't tapped, right? And you'll notice that once you've gotten that market that they haven't tapped, that you can start gaining more and more ground by starting to uh, build up your MVP to match their features in in the uh, in the other features of your applications that not aren't necessarily your delighters or your exciters. All right, so just be different. Build your MVP, but make it different than everybody else. You want to build a social media app, for instance, and you have Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat. Think of how your social media application can be different. Let your application be different. That's what Snapchat did. That's how Snapchat gained hold. It was no longer about text posts and sharing pictures. It was about providing very quick entertainment that disappeared after 24 hours. That allowed them to get into a niche market, right? That niche market started to slowly grow as Snapchat added more features. That's how I would approach it if I had multiple competitors in the market. I hope my answer covered your question. If it didn't and you need more detail, please ask a follow up question such that I can uh, answer it more clearly. Yeah, definitely. Go ahead. Ask away. uh, how can you approach the SaaS company that I'm building its software? How can I approach customer in B2B segment? Because Kuwait is different from the USA. YouTube are suggesting email and stuff, and I don't think it works here. Uh, in Kuwait, but definitely go there. Go to the businesses, let them see your face, develop a direct kind of relationship with them. I think one of the best ways to build trust in Kuwait is by face-to-face meetings, and that's both a good and bad thing. Like for instance, it has it definitely has its downsides, but I have definitely noticed that the best way to get around approaching clients in Kuwait is face-to-face meetings, to the point where we have projects that are stopped during the coronavirus lockdown, not because of us being unable to work on it. It's they have been stopped because our the clients can't have a face. I think email is a good way to conduct business in Kuwait until after you have developed a rapport with the clientele. Put yourself out there. Uh, go to the companies, go to the clients, and always remember that the worst thing they can say is, and if they say no, I mean it's their loss. There are other clients. So do I? The question is, so do I mention my product on the phone when attempting to get a meeting, or say that I want a meeting with them? Uh, that's that's really a case by case. If you and if on the phone you're talking to their secretary, I would say mention the product. Uh, but if you're talking to them directly, I would say mention that you want to meet them. Uh, that really depends on the person you're talking to, and I think that's a more of you need to feel out the conversation and know where it's going. I mean, some clients you might even just go and walk into their company or to their office and talk to them directly without even a prior phone call. It might be a better idea than actually trying to set up a meeting. Um, but it's very good in Kuwait to think about getting word of mouth. So try to look in your network if there's someone who knows one of these clients, because most Kuwaiti clients will be more likely to do business with you if they've heard a good word about you from a mutual friend or a mutual acquaintance. You're most welcome, Tech Coding X. Uh, and Nasser, I guess also you're welcome. I'm glad we were able to help you. There's another question. What do you think of game apps? Can you name some examples that are famous, have million downloads, and cost around 10,000 KD maybe? Uh, that's a that's a very opinionated question. So I don't think my it's more of I think that's a very subjective question. Um, what do I think of game apps? I I love gaming in general. I do appreciate some phone games or games that are mobile. In general, I think that a lot of mobile smartphone games depend way too much on ads, and I don't like that. Uh, can I name some examples that are famous, have million downloads, and cost 10,000 KD? I mean, as a combination together, I mean, I guess uh, Flappy Birds is one that comes to mind. Uh, some form of Angry Birds game, you could probably get away with 10,000 KD. I think it's very hard to just generally blurt out a KD amount for a application or a game app, especially because it's really going to depend on application or a game app, especially because it's really going to depend on how many levels you want, how many characters you want, uh, and it's really important to know that 10,000 KD is on the lower end of game development. For like if you look for instance, if you look at Subway Surfer, that's a game that costs around 100,000 USD to make, which is 30,000 KD, and that's not even a very technically intensive game, right? That's just you flick up and then you go right and you go left, or Temple Run or whatever you want. One of those games. That's as I said, that's a difficult question to answer in general, but I mean, if uh, there are definitely some great game apps out there. Ones that cost around 10,000 KD are few and far between, but I guess you could definitely find some that are very good that are around that could be built around that cost. I mean, I guess Candy Crush can be one of them as long as you don't make 1,000 levels. You could make maybe 60, 70 levels, or something like I don't know, High Noon. If anyone remembers that game. Regarding the previous question, how can I create a game for PS, PC, or Xbox? Let's say. Okay, so PC, very easy. Just you can go to unity.com, or you can look up Unity Game Engine and download that and start learning how to use the Unity Game Engine. You could also go to uh, Unreal. You could go to the Unreal Engine and also download that and start learning, or you can learn the Lua programming language, and start building games. As for PS or Xbox, you need to get a PS or Xbox SDK. That's a little bit more difficult and more costly. If you want to get into game development, I would say PC game development is the easiest to get into, other than mobile game development, and Unity is a good choice to get started with that. So another question from Tech Coding X: what do you think about having meetings at cafes and not having a meeting room for the company for a startup after Corona? I mean, uh, that I don't think that's a bad idea, honestly. It, use whatever means you have. I don't like. I like to think that if you have the confidence and you have the skills, you'll be convinced a lot of clients in cafes, and without having to have a meeting room in the startups that I worked for in the past, or while freelancing. It's never a bad thing to tell the client that you'll meet them at their company, and meeting at a cafe is totally fine. I don't think that the place you meet in defines the quality of your work. Your work speaks for itself, and you should have the confidence to represent your work wherever you are. And you're welcome, Nasa. You're most welcome, and yeah, see you tomorrow, inshallah. Yes, this session is recorded, and hopefully we will be editing it and providing the edited session, so we remove the pauses and the break and uh, those kind of things out, and then we will release it. All right, you're all most welcome, and I think that's all the questions I guess we have for the day. I'll see you all tomorrow. Hopefully, there will be a bigger crowd, and thank you. I'll see you all tomorrow. Hopefully, there will be a bigger crowd, and thank you again all for your time.